The scuffles broke out when demonstrators gathered in Puerto del Sol, the central square that has been a focal point of a wave of protests since May last year. The rally was against the new labor reforms introduced by the government on Friday. The reforms include the slashing of employees' maximum severance pay and offering of contracts with various incentives set to encourage the hiring of young workers. The measures are the latest in a series of efforts to deal with the country's economic crisis. The government has promised to cut Spain's unemployment rate, which reached nearly 23% at the end of 2011, the highest in the industrialized world. While you're watching Press TV's World News, time for a reminder of our headlines for this hour. Argentina slams Britain for militarizing the South Atlantic and complains to the UN Security Council. Egypt's ruling junta talked tough ahead of a nationwide general strike against military rule. In Bahrain, tens of thousands of people demand an end to monarchical rule. And in Greece, police clash with anti-austerity protesters as the government approves a bailout deal with the EU. Plenty more news coming your way later on in this bulletin. Japan invites influential bloggers to boost its tourism. The details on that and much more when we return. Welcome back, everybody. Terrorists have targeted security installations in the Syrian city of Aleppo, killing civilians. This as the Syrian Ministry of Interior is launching a campaign to eliminate armed groups. Here's more.
Two terrorist explosions have rocked the Syrian city of Aleppo, leaving at least 28 people killed and 235 wounded. Among the people killed were civilians, children, and law enforcement and army personnel. A suicide bomber driving a booby-trapped bus targeted a law enforcement center in Al-Arqub area. Armed men directly also opened fire following the explosion. 2 minutes later, another booby-trapped car hit a military security branch near Al-Basel Square.
At 9 a.m., a booby-trapped car targeted the military security branch. First investigations show that the explosives used weigh more than 500 kilograms. We will continue efforts to eliminate armed groups.
The Ministry of Information organized a field visit to the locations for local, Arab and international news reporters. While the reporters were filming the area, armed groups intensively opened gunfire at the law enforcement center again, and clashes started. The bodies of the people killed and the wounded were taken to Al-Razi Hospital.
I was going to buy food for breakfast in the morning. Armed men opened gunfire and I was hit.
The Ministry of Interior issued a statement saying that such terrorist attacks will not weaken or stop its efforts aimed at eliminating armed groups and restoring security. The ministry also blamed Western states for the bloodshed by backing terrorists in Syria.
The attacks are aimed at harming security in Aleppo. We call on the government to put an end to armed terrorists. We will stay united in the face of terrorism.
Meanwhile, the Foreign Ministry sent a letter to the UN Secretary General, the Arab League Secretary General, and other international organizations, briefing them on the attacks. The letter added that the terrorists behind the attacks are backed by Arab and Western countries. Internationally, Russia condemned the attacks and said that Western states, which are instigating Syrian opposition members and providing them weapons, are participating in aggravating the situation in Syria. Russia also said that ending violence in Syria depends now on the opposition. This is not the first time Syrian cities have been the targets of bomb attacks. Observers say such attacks continue to harm and destabilize the security of the country. Hamad Ali, Press TV, Aleppo.
In other news, U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke says low house prices and sales are a serious drag on America's already sluggish economic recovery.
The state of the housing sector has been a key impediment to a faster recovery. In a typical economic recovery, as you know, a resurgent housing sector helps fuel re-employment and rising incomes. But as you know all too well, that scenario has not played out this time.
Bernanke says declines in home prices have forced many Americans to cut back sharply on spending. He warned that the trend could weigh on the economy for years. The Fed chairman said there's no, quote, silver bullet to rescue the housing market. 2011 was the weakest year for new home sales since 1963. Bernanke reiterated that the economic recovery has been frustratingly slow. He made a renewed push for programs to convert foreclosed homes into rental units to help revive the housing market. Well, the shooting of an unarmed teenager in New York has set off protests against the police for their use of deadly force. Press TV's Gary Anthony Ramsey reports.
Outrage continues to build on the streets of New York 1 week after police shot and killed a teenager in the bathroom of his own home. 18-year-old Ramarley Graham was unarmed, even though police say they believed he was carrying a weapon. An outrageous and overused lie, say his neighbors, who insist officers involved committed murder.
We are you! We are you! We are your future! We are your future! Do not criminalize! Harass! Stop and frisk! And murder! Youth that look like me!
Police have released video to back up their claims that Ramarley Graham was running from the scene of a drug buy. But security video from his own home shows the teen walking to open the door, then being pursued by police who break in without a warrant. Graham was shot in the upstairs bathroom after one officer screamed, "Gun, gun!" No weapon or drugs were found in the home or on the victim.
Enough is enough is enough. I don't want to keep seeing more and more of these cases. Police on border modified duties. Then they take him back out after 2 months, after they make us go to sleep, and put him back on the job somewhere else. I say they should be fired, investigated, and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
The NYPD says they are investigating the incident and reviewing the procedures of the narcotics unit that was involved. The parents of the dead teen are angry, and they believe cops are trying to smear their son's reputation to justify his death.
He's 18 years old, but he's a baby. He does everything as far as the way he act, the way he laugh, the way he play, like a baby. It's loving, friendly. Still kisses me on the cheek whenever he sees me. I love you every time before he hangs up the phone.
Officer Richard Haste, who fired the fatal bullet, and Sergeant Scott Morris have both been stripped of their guns and placed on modified duty for the duration of the investigation. On Monday, demonstrations over the shooting will continue as hundreds are set to march in front of the office of the Bronx District Attorney. Protesters are demanding that the officers involved be criminally charged with murder. The very next day, Ramarley Graham's family will bury the teenager they say they loved so much. Gary Anthony Ramsey, Press TV, New York.
And Japan plans to boost tourism by inviting influential bloggers and Twitter users from around the world to visit areas devastated by last year's earthquake and tsunami. Press TV's Catherine Makino reports from Tokyo.
The Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs plans to use social media to jumpstart the country's lagging tourist industry and demonstrate that it is safe to visit Japan. The ministry has invited 10 influential guests to visit the country. December saw the first blogger from Spain, followed shortly afterwards by a food blogger from the United States, and next by a Muslim Brotherhood blogger from Egypt at the end of January.
Traditionally, we have invited foreign journalists, writers of maybe magazines or newspapers or TV crews. But this year, as a part of those efforts of Japanese government to restore the confidence in Japan, we decided to invite worldwide bloggers and tweeters. We take various things into consideration, such as the number of followers or number of good positive reactions from the leaders.
The Japanese government hopes that these bloggers and tweeters will write about their experiences. The ministry hopes they will write for their fans that the country is recovering and remains an attractive tourist destination. One of Tokyo's most famous landmarks, Tokyo Tower, attracted approximately 3 million visitors each year before the disaster. Tokyo Tower saw its numbers sharply decrease right after the earthquake, but today people are starting to come back. While tourist numbers are recovering, visitors are still not traveling to the devastated areas.
Since May the last year, the visitors' numbers have been increasing, and so as we saw the sign that this will continue, but to a particular destination like the Tohoku, where the earthquake happened, it may take 1 year or even longer to recover so far as tourism is concerned.
One Australian tourist asked about radiation in Japan said she wasn't scared about it.
Friends of mine had been before and said it was amazing. My mum was a little bit nervous about the radiation following the earthquake, but yeah, not really that scared.
The next scheduled visitors are a Chilean university professor and a Chinese children's story writer who will come to the country next month. The Japanese government hopes that they will let the world know of Japan's recovery from the disaster and the country's continued attraction as a tourist destination. This is Catherine Makino for Press TV in Tokyo.
Well, that's a wrap for this edition of Press TV's World News. Stick around, I'll be back on the top of the hour with our news in brief. It's goodbye for now from the news desk.